I'm going to go ahead and give a couple more minutes for people to join us. Thank you for everybody who is in attendance or who's attending today. This is Need for Speed reading strategies. So yeah, I'll give it a couple minutes, like I said. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Cody Mathis. I'm the Director of Accessibility here at Siena Heights University. And this is part of a webinar series for study skills and college survival skills. And today we're going to be talking about reading strategies for college students under pressure. So there are 6 myths about reading that you should know. You have to read every word. This is a myth. You do not have to read every word. As much as professors probably do not want you to know this, you do not have to read every word. You may have to read your text more than once. Again, not true. You should read your text once, and you should read your notes multiple times. So yeah, the hope is in today's webinar that you learn some reading strategies that only take you through the text one time and help you develop those notes, and to get on track in reading those multiple times. So you cannot skip parts of the text. Well, you can. You learn that there are parts of the text that you can skip. It depends on the class and what you're reading for. And so, yeah, there are parts of the text you can skip. You must force yourself to read faster to be a good reader. This is not true. You can't force yourself to read faster or comprehend better. This is both a combination of genetics and practice, which requires a consistency factor. And so you can't force yourself to read faster, and shouldn't, because it will probably impact your comprehension, which is the whole point of reading at a college level. You can read while doing other things, while you're distracted. You should not. The brain is really fantastic at faking multitasking, but in reality, you should read in a pretty undistracted environment. Distractions really do interfere with your ability to not only read well, but to comprehend what you're reading. And that leads me to the last one. It's all about your eyes. If you're not reading well, you probably should get your eyes checked. No, actually, it's all about the brain. Your eyes are probably fine. I mean, if you truly have a suspicion that maybe your eyes, if you got blurry pages or something, you probably do want to go in and get your eyes checked. But in general, It's really about your brain and the connection between your eyes and your brain and the understanding. Okay, so there's a how and what we read. In general, we read certain things a certain way, and this applies to educational readings as well. One way that we read things is scanning. Scanning is, pretty much used by everybody. When you look in a telephone book, and well, okay, I just made myself obviously way older than you. When you look at your Facebook and you're, scrolling through and something catches your eye, that's scanning or skimming, all right? When you are looking for that specific contact in your contacts, when you are flipping through Instagram or Snapchat, those are all skim and scan activities. They're just smaller detail, or the smaller details are being disregarded, and you're simply focusing on main words, main pictures. You might be looking at a news app and just looking at the titles or the main words. This is a really great way to get a first impression of an article, especially in college when lots of professors use additional text, supplemental texts in their classes. You can definitely skim those types of things to just get an idea of what you're going to be reading. Active and detailed reading is, typically you do the skimming or the scanning first, but then you go through some detail work. In active reading, you don't necessarily read every word, but you're reading for context and content. Detailed reading, you're paying attention to all of the words. You're extracting important information from the text. This is a good thing if you are in a class that's very heavy on the reading and citing readings and needing to use those readings to answer questions thoroughly. This would be a great way to read for that. But you don't have to do it all at once, and we'll talk about that too. There's speed reading. This, you can just improve your reading speed and not lose your comprehension. You want to still be able to understand what you're reading and be able to answer some questions about that. It's difficult and requires lots of practice. This is not something you will see immediate results on. You cannot practice speed reading for 2 days and expect that by Friday you're going to be a better speed reader. But some of the main aspects of speed reading are identifying words without focusing on each letter, so learning to see a word as a whole instead of individual letters, not sounding out all of the words, not sub-vocalizing some phrases, so not, speaking under your breath and things like that. If that's how you read, that's how you read. But in order to be a more effective speed reader, you will need to learn how not to. And you want to spend less time on some phrases than others and learning, and part of that is learning how to hone your scanning and skimming skills so that you can know what's important and what is not. The last way people read in general is called the structure preposition evaluation technique. And this is really only applicable to nonfiction. So to factual, biographical kinds of writings and textbooks. You just have to stick to 3 steps. You review the table of contents, all of the paragraphs of the article or the layout of the text, so you get a feel for how things are set up. You study the statements of the text and you put them in logical order or relation to each other, and then you evaluate the final arguments or the summaries and conclusions of the text. So this is a kind of traditional way people read college books. We're going to talk about some ways to make this easier though, because if you are like me, not only do I have limited time, I also kind of have limited bandwidth. And what that means is sometimes my brain does not want to read an entire chapter. It can't. I could read it 5 times and I probably would not comprehend all of it the way I should, just reading words. So we're going to talk about some suggestions to make these. Oh, I forgot to highlight my words. Look at there. I did fancy animations and color and everything. But so we're going to talk about some of the reading strategies for smart students. Everybody is a smart student, so this applies to everyone. Not every strategy will work for every person, but that's the beauty of strategies. We're not talking a strategy, we're talking strategies. So something will work for you. And hopefully you will learn something today that will help you be more successful in your classes going forward. Okay, so first off, there's the no reading method. And that sounds like a really great deal, right? It's kind of a trick. You don't actually read the entire chapter. What you read is things like the title, the entries in the margin, the list of or table of contents, the words in bold. You look at headings and text boxes, subordinate headings, figures, graphs, models. You look at any prefaces or abstracts in the text. You look at the text on the back of the book. Some books have that synopsis on the back. You look at the index and the illustrations and the index of names. Nowhere does it say you actually read the content of the book. So for instance, if this was the book I was going to read, if this was my textbook, first off, I would know that this is a guide to crisis intervention. And so I can see already that. So in this book, it actually has 2 table of contents. I want to pay attention to that because one is useful for getting to where I need to go, and one is useful for knowing what I'm going to read about. So the first one is a brief contents, and that's the one I really want to look at. If I'm looking for chapter 5, I know it's on 109 because I can just scan down to chapter 5 and see 109. But say the instructor said I have to read chapter 1. Well, I can go to chapter 1 and find it's on page 1. That's pretty easy. But then if I use the contents on the right-hand side of the screen, I see that they have laid it out much more specifically. And say this week we are actually talking about emotional distress, I could skip right ahead to page 10 and read first about emotional distress, and then go back and fill in some blanks with that non-reading technique, looking at the words. For instance, chapter 1 starts with this little quiz. What a cool thing. I can scan this quiz, answer some questions, see how I might do, and kind of get an idea of what things are going to be answered in this chapter, and see how it aligns with perhaps what I've been assigned. Is this where the teacher gets, the instructor gets their questions? Is there a quiz at the end of my reading? Maybe I want to read this just to get familiar. On the right-hand side of the screen, if I look, I can see what is a crisis and crisis intervention. So we're starting at the beginning. We're not moving to that emotional thing, but I see some bold words: grief work, Gerald Kaplan, Wellesley Project, preventive psychiatry, 7 characteristics of effective coping behaviors. All right, so now I go back and I go, what is grief work? And if I read that, it talks about how Lindemann joined others from Massachusetts General Hospital to help survivors who lost loved ones. So grief work is obviously working with people who have lost loved ones. It's working with people whose loved ones have died. Okay, and then I see Gerald Kaplan, and I can connect Lindemann to Gerald Kaplan because I see that worked with, and they started something called the Wellesley Project, and that is a mental health program in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I could read more if I wanted, but I'm going to skip down here. Kaplan, who we know is connected to Lindemann and the Wellesley Project, focuses on preventive psychiatry, which is early intervention to promote positive growth and minimize chance of psychological impairment. And it was mental health consultation emphasis. Okay, so we see that. So now if I jump down, I see the 7 characteristics of effective coping behaviors came out of that Wellesley Project. Kaplan, describe that, and we can look right here at the table. So far, I have not read 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs, but I have looked at some key vocabulary, a table, some questions at the beginning, and I kind of have an idea what this chapter is about. I might not do so bad on a pop quiz, and I didn't have to read all of that. Okay. I do want to point out too that I'm talking this through. Had I been reading this, or had you been reading this, it would have been a much faster process because I wouldn't have had to talk it out. I would have just done it. Here I'm working with you and guiding you, so it's a little bit slower. But yeah, I would have been done in a matter of moments, and I would have had a pretty good idea of what this is about. So, and this book, for instance, if this was really your text, has some fantastic margins. I know that so many of you rent textbooks or plan to resell your textbooks. If you aren't going to write in the margins, have your paper ready, because we're going to talk about that step next, or not next, but soon, on why these margins are so important. So there's another method. We talked about the no reading method, and now we'll talk about the SPORT method. The SPORT method is more of mental questioning. You say to yourself, where did I see this information? So you let yourself know, okay, it was in chapter 1. We talked about Lindemann and Kaplan and the Wellesley Project and how they started with some grief work, but then they moved on to these 7 key effective coping techniques. And so, yeah. So there, I saw that in chapter 1. Picture what I read. If I picture it, I can kind of remember there was a table that showed the 7 questions, and there were about 4 paragraphs. There weren't any pictures. I remember the picture on the first page of the chapter. You can organize in your mind all your study aids. So if you end up using multiple techniques for reading strategies, you can kind of set them up. Remember to dump information. This is that fill the margins. If you don't fill margins, fill your notebook, fill your page. I don't even care. You can have blank sheets of paper or Post-it notes that you stick on the page so that they're right where you read it. That can work too. It doesn't have to be margins, but definitely dump your information and then tell yourself to go back to the dumped info. This is the whole don't reread the chapter. Take notes, make notes, dump your information, and then go back later. Don't do it the same day. Go back the next day, or go back and, if you do the same day, give yourself a mental break in between so it's fresh again. Okay, that's the SPORT method. There's not a lot to do. It's mostly a mental checklist. Okay. So now I think you've probably all seen this at some point in your K-12 journey. SQ3R method is used all the time from, I'd say, 2nd grade to 12th grade. And oftentimes in English courses in college talk about the SQ3R method as well. So the SQ3R is SQ and then 3 R's. Survey, question, read, recite, and review. You survey using that no reading method if you want, but basically you're just looking at titles, headings, pictures, and chapter summaries. You are getting a very basic idea of the reading material. And as you're surveying, you're going to be asking yourself questions. If you saw grief work, well, what is grief work? You can be asking yourself that. What is grief work? Or if I saw crisis intervention, okay, how does crisis intervention tie into what we're learning? You're going to read for comprehension. This is not a no-read method. This is reading in that active, detailed way that I was talking about. And you can break it into sections and time limits. If you are not into reading, read for 10 minutes or 20 minutes and then take a break and go do something else. And then read for 10 or 20 minutes and do it again. Because the reality is, if you don't read, you don't enjoy reading, it's not your best learning style, then the reality is you're going to hit a plateau, and anything you read after that time isn't going to get stored anyway, because then you're just reading words, you're not comprehending. And so I definitely encourage you to take those breaks, break it into time limits. You can flip from one topic to another. So say you have reading in your philosophy class and reading in your history class. I recommend that you read for 15 minutes each, back and forth for a certain period of time. Say you can only read for an hour. So do 15 minutes of history, 15 minutes of philosophy, 15 minutes of history, 15 minutes of philosophy. You will find that you get so much more done than if you just tried to straight read for an hour out of your history textbook, unless reading is your learning style and you really love it. But I'm assuming if you're here, it's probably because you're like me and I would rather not learn through reading. I enjoy reading for pleasure, but that's not comprehending and retaining. So recite. The recite piece is the note taking and answering your questions that you thought of when you were surveying, and that you can by doing so, you transfer that information to the long-term memory parts of your brain. So when you use multiple parts of your body to do something, so with your eyes to read, and if you read it out loud while you are answering your questions, that can also activate that long-term memory. When you write it, you're activating long-term memory. So just reading it doesn't necessarily activate long-term memory. It helps to do that recite piece. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to do it verbally. You can do it in written form. You can also do this in a few ways we talk about coming up in how you take those notes. So it may be visually or kinesthetically, okay? And then review. This would be summarizing the main ideas and concepts and reviewing the key learning concepts so that you know them. It's taking a second to make sure that I do remember what grief work is and that I'm familiar with the Wellesley Project and things like that. How many of you have already forgotten what those were? All right. I mean, if you're, like I said, you really have to learn to activate that long-term memory. And this is just one way to do it. So then there's the note-taking method of reading, which sounds like a lot of extra work, but it's so good. This one's my favorite out of all of them, but I think I still appreciate the others, and I use all of them depending on the class and the environment that I'm in. If I'm attending a conference, I definitely am a note-taking method person, but that's because I like to activate that long-term memory. So the note-taking method is really useful because the notes can act as your study guide. They're a work in progress, so you can constantly be changing them. You can learn what notes work for your class. So not every note-taking style we're going to talk about works for every class, and that's okay. It shouldn't. You should have different ways to take notes in different classes. Again, activating that long-term memory and retention of information and being able to recall it later when you take a quiz or a test or an exam. You're going to review, redo, and review. So that means you're going to review your notes, make corrections where you need corrections, and then re-review them. You're going to summarize your notes. This helps with comprehension, but it also is a cheat for that writing piece that we haven't talked about, and we're not going to talk about too much today, but I am going to say this. Learning to summarize your notes helps you so much in summarizing for your papers that you have to write, or paraphrasing. Those are such amazing skills and help you avoid plagiarism. It's fantastic. If you learn to summarize well, you're going to do great in writing as well as reading. You're going to define key terms. So in the note-taking method, many times you're going to copy those terms to your paper and also the definition. And again, that's going to activate that long-term memory differently. You're going to draw connections between different concepts such as cause and effect, or dates, times, places, people, for events. It can be things like connections between, it would be maybe a comparison between one writing method and another writing method, that kind of thing. You're going to paraphrase concepts and quotations, again, working on not only our reading skills, but our writing skills at the same time, double win-win. Ask yourself questions and use the answers in your notes. And then noting questions to ask your instructor and get the answers during office hours. Use your office hours. I know that has nothing to do with reading strategies, but I'm here to tell you, use your professor's office hours. If they offer them, use them. That's what they're there for. They want you to come and ask questions. They want you to learn, and they want to help guide you through that. So definitely get those questions you can't answer into your notes so you can take them to your office hours, which will help you with those reading. So, note-taking for reading success as part of the note-taking method of reading. There are 4 parts: outlining method, Cornell method, the charts or tables method, and the concept mapping, graphic visuals, and drawing notes method, okay? They all have different purposes. They're all right. There's no wrong. And here we go. So outlining, as you can see on the right-hand side and the left-hand side, they're identical. The reason is one is an image and one is text. And they're just different contrast to make it easier for certain people to see. But basically outlining is taking the title of whatever, for instance, crisis and crisis management or crisis intervention was the title of chapter 1. I would put that as the title. Then the main idea would be me looking at that contents portion and putting some main ideas down. Grief work, Wellesley project. Those would be my 1, 2, 3, however many main ideas. This is just a 2 main idea sample, but you can do whatever you want. There's no limit to that. And then a supporting idea that explains or provides evidence for. So if my first idea was for instance, grief work, I might just define what grief work is. Grief work is supporting or supportive interventions for people who have lost loved ones. That's grief work. The number 1 then are supporting ideas that explain or provide evidence for that definition. How do I know that? Well, let's talk about Lindemann and his work and Kaplan and his work. So that could be 1 is Lindemann and his work and 2 could be Kaplan and his work. That's what an outline is. This would be very useful if you were in a class where you had to write a lot of papers based on your readings. This is an excellent way to take notes from your readings because not only do you understand, does it help you understand the content, but it is setting you up for a fantastically organized paper. So this is really great for that kind of reading. The Cornell method. This is good for classes where you have a lot of keyword recall or facts that you need to be able to bring to mind when taking a test. If you have an instructor who does a lot of short answer quizzes and exams, this would be a great way to take notes from your readings because it will help you study. So the note-taking area, you're going to record this says lecture, I'm not reading, but as fully and as meaningfully as possible. So if you are talking or if you are reading about crisis and crisis intervention, you are going to take really good notes from your reading, and you're going to keep the Q column empty, and then after you're done reading, you're going to go back and put in some cues, and I'm going to show you what this looks like in a second so it makes a little more sense to you. And then the summaries is you're just going to summarize the whole page of notes in a sentence or 2, okay? And this helps you go through those 5 R's: the record, reduce, recite, reflect, and review. Those are all part of the Cornell method. And you record, so when you're reading, you're going to record as much meaningful fact and ideas as you can and make sure you're writing clearly. Then reduce as soon as possible, summarize these facts into the Q column. By clarifying meanings and relationships, it's going to reinforce your continuity and it strengthens that memory. And reciting, this is how it helps you study. So you can either fold your page over. This says cover. I typically just fold it, honestly. So you're going to and only use your Q column and say those facts and ideas of the reading as much as you can, like in your own words. It doesn't have to be word verbatim from the book, but in your own words, and then make sure you got it right by looking on that note-taking side. Then you're going to reflect, and that's forming opinions from your notes. You can use them as a starting point for reflections. Like if you have to do discussion board posts on something, this is a great way to get those discussion board posts flowing, because it helps you develop opinions and how it relates to courses. It will also help that long-term memory activation. So they're not going to, inert and soon forgotten means, you know, here and gone, here today, gone tomorrow. And then review. Spend 10 minutes every week reviewing your past notes, and you'll retain most of what you learn. And when it comes time for those midterms and finals, whoo, you'll be good to go. It'll be fantastic. So I said I would show you. This is a Cornell note page here. So the Q column is right here in the green section on the left-hand side of the page. It takes up about a third, I would say, you know, maybe a little less than a third, but it's not a very wide column. On the lined paper that has the 3-hole punch, I would say that you would double the space between the edge and the first blue line, or the first red line that goes up and down, and then take that over like 1.5 of those. You know, as you can see, they say about 2.5 inches of space. And then the note-taking area is the remaining 6, because the page is 8.5 by 11. And then the bottom for summaries is only about 2 inches tall. You're not making a big summary. This is not a paper that you're writing in the summary. Just a couple sentences to kind of summarize what's going on, so that you can, that really is just to activate that long-term memory and help you gauge your own understanding, okay? So that was the Cornell method. Now there's the charts and tables method. The charting method is not good for every class. Like I said, all of these are not necessarily universal reading strategies. When you're reading a book and you're using the charting method, this would be for things that have facts or stats, statistical information, or like the sample picture on the right side of the screen shows what could possibly be they're reading a history textbook. So there's dates, the event, which was the war, which countries were involved, which leaders were prominent at that time. And then the last part, it's blurry, but so that's, I can't read that, but that's obviously the gist of the pictures, to give you an idea that it's more about facts and statistics that you can connect in a tabular way. Subtopics are directly comparable to each other, so I wouldn't put a date in column 1, or I'm sorry, row 1, I wouldn't put 1939 to 1945, and then in row 2, put a location. You want to make sure that they're really directly comparable to each other in each slot. If you didn't have something, you could do like they did in that second row and just put a line through it. It can be compartmentalized into tables. If you're tech savvy, you can do it on your computer as you read, and just go into either Microsoft Excel, or you can create a table right in Microsoft Word. That is totally acceptable. You probably get more into it. If you're like me, it doesn't connect as well when I'm typing, so I like to do it written. And then I might transfer it to a typed table after I've written it out. But basically, the easy parts are to identify the topics and categories. That would be along the top, would be the main topic and subtopics and sections, and then the topics and categories underneath. And then insert the topics, subtopics, and categories in the chart, fill the chart with notes, and review and recite the information. You shouldn't have to reread the text after using something like this, because you have what you need right there in your table. So it works nicely that way. Okay, we could even try, for instance, this text piece here would be the kind of text I personally would use tabular notes for. So I can give you a few moments to read through that, and then you'll see how we can possibly do that. I'll go ahead and mute myself, and then I will let you go ahead, and I'll come back to it in just a second after you're done reading. Okay, I think I think everybody probably read through that, but I might take this and put the title above it as Michigan and the Great Lakes, and then maybe Michigan facts, and put some like 1830s immigrant population soared, 1850 and how many residents they had. You could do a lot with tables in this particular passage. So I hope you were able to practice a little of the things we've done so far just with this little piece. So then there's concept mapping, graphic visuals, and drawing notes. This is probably the one I use a lot. I tend to be what my grandma called a doodler when I'm learning. I just like to use this. I like all of the note taking, but this one definitely is the easiest for me to make connections sometimes. So I think we're most familiar with the mapping that looks kind of like this. You have a topic, you have a subtopic. Sometimes they come off in a circle. I think we use these in school, things that look kind of like this one we're familiar with. Basically, there's just 6 fundamentals of visual note taking that you just want to think about when you're making them. Is your letters. How are you making your letters? Do you do like me and bold your main topics? Do you write in one style for certain levels, and then for like the topic I might write in all caps, and for subtopics I might write in small caps, and then my related ideas I might write in cursive? I don't know, just things like that. Your letters. You can use bulleting. What do your bullets mean? Do you have a system where one bullet means this, another? This is really useful if you are taking notes in a class for a text, and you are just writing facts down. Right now, you're just doing for instance, you're just doing a dump, and then you're going to turn that dump into more organized notes. Do you use bulleting to sort out the different kinds of facts you're putting down? Do you use framing? Do you have them all square like this? Do you use circles? Do you use call out boxes? Do you use, how do you set apart your information and detail what it means and how it connects and is interrelated. The connectors are using arrows, lines, squigglies. I mean, there's a whole mess of ways you can do things, right? Are using shadows. I didn't use shadows on any of these, and I realized I could have. Definitely makes things stand out. Are you are you shadowing the part that you're going to use the most? Maybe you're doing a research project and you found out that not only is your topic very broad, but you want to just study this part, so you could shadow those things. And peeps, how are you using the people around you? Do you use people when you do visual note taking? Do you draw pictures? Is this I do a lot of stick people when I do stuff, and heads, upper heads like this, only I don't usually put hair on it. They're just hairless busts of people. But how do you use them to illustrate a concept that you are working on? Okay, so that's concept mapping, graphic visuals. It's basically turning the information, ideas, and facts and all the concepts that you're reading about into images and of some kind, or a visual representation. Okay, how do you use, one thing they don't mention on these 6 fundamentals is color. I would say that's the hidden 7th fundamental. How do you use color? Do you highlight things? Do you use different colored pens? Things like that. So I definitely want to add that in as a secret 7th, I guess. If you are interested, we talked about speed reading, and I am not going to teach how to speed read specifically, but if you are interested in knowing how fast you read and how that impacts your comprehension and some tips on how to improve that, this link here can take you right to it. I'll click on it and let you guys, I'll pull that over for you. Just a second. Let me pull that over. All right, I hope you can see this in the screen now. So this is how you take the test. You can't see anything until you click start, and then you can go ahead and click start and read. Okay, and then when you're done, you push end and you answer the questions. This is a neurological, there are 2, and there you go. I read about 2,148 words per minute with 100% comprehension. Now, if that makes you go, what in the world? I've read this once before. I have taken the test. So don't panic. My original, I have practiced speed reading for a number of years as well. So there's that consistency and practice piece. And my average reading speed actually runs right around 768, I think. But I usually still keep that 100% comprehension. I'm between 90 and 100. And you want to be at least 85. So if you fall below 85, go back and practice, like go backwards and go back a step and practice and increase your speed. If you're down here at slow, that doesn't mean you're a bad reader. It means you're not a speed reader. And so these slow, average, fast, and speed reader don't mean much. What you really want to pay attention to is your comprehension and how you answered those questions, because that means your brain retained the information you read. And again, you may never be a speed reader, and that's okay. And at the university and college level, the point of reading is to learn information and to gain that comprehension of the content. So it really is more important that you can read and get that 90 to 100% comprehension. Okay. All right. So there's that. You can access this PowerPoint will be available along with the recording on the website. So you can think about, how did you do? Did you think you would be where you were? What about your comprehension? Like I said, just those are the things you want to pay attention to. And then maybe go back and practice reading that with some of the techniques we talked about today. and then see if it increases your comprehension. That one's a little more simplistic than some, but it even has a nice little swiftread.com has a nice little program if you wanted to do it. So then here's some tips and tricks to kind of round out the end here. Are you ready to read? I mean, hopefully all of you are ready to read, but are you ready to not read? I would definitely recommend reading sitting up with good light. This says at a desk or a table. To be honest with you, I like to read in a nice, comfortable chair, and I can't always get that at a desk or a table. But when I'm reading for content, it helps because I typically want to take those notes. So if I'm juggling a notebook and all of that, it really does help to have that desk or table right there. Keep background noise to a minimum. I completely understand. I have 4 kids, and we do foster care, and we have 3 dogs in about 1,000 square foot 3-bedroom apartment. So background noise is just reality. But I can go into my bedroom where I do have a desk, and I don't have the loud rock music. Even if that is something you enjoy, like I said, the brain cannot necessarily do as much simultaneous work as it likes to pretend it can. So you want to reduce those other distractions too, talking to your roommates, if you have kids playing nearby, if you are a parenting college student, the television or radio. I know that it is very tempting to have the television play or have some radio noise. We have become a society that's really uncomfortable with quiet, but practice getting to a place where that is what you do. Because the reality is no music is playing when you're taking that test. And studies show that how you learn the information oftentimes is the environment that you want when you're trying to recall that information. So if you are studying with rock music and people everywhere at the park or in a noisy environment, and then you get into your test, you could find yourself struggling to recall partly because of environment. So don't do that to yourself. Remember to keep your paper and pen within reach. Notes, folks. Notes are so important when you're reading. Like I said, you could never read an actual part of the chapter, and I bet if you took notes on those key points that we talked about in the no reading method, you still probably would do so good and shock yourself. All right? I'm not telling you not to read, but I'm just saying with the combination of paper and pen, you will be amazed. I'd also keep your notebook from the lecture handy and connect those. Like add notes from reading right onto your lecture notes. That is an excellent way to connect things from what the professor is saying to what you're reading in the book. Fantastic idea. Survey the reading. Remember, don't read it first, just survey it. And you can even do it backwards. Start at the back of whatever you're trying to read, that last page. Maybe it has questions or a summary. So then you get the summary first, and then you go through and look at all those headings and the title and the bold words and the little boxes and the graphs and the illustrations. And by the time you get to the content, you're just scanning that for importance. Make sure you strategize your approach. This one's that what I just talked about. Read the introduction and the conclusion. Then go read the whole assignment, or read the first line in every paragraph, or go back and read it from the beginning. There's a lot of ways. Use one of those strategies we talked about today and see how it goes. Scan effectively. You can just scan, focusing on those most interesting or relevant parts. Pay attention when you skim and when you need to understand every word. Sometimes you just need to skim. We've talked about that. Maybe your instructor's not really big on using the text for exams, but maybe just for discussion board posts. In that case, you probably don't need to read every word, but you do have to understand the content. So yeah, write as you read. Again, keep that paper and pen within reach. Take notes and talk back to the book. Explain in detail the concepts, mark up the pages. If you read with a friend nearby, you can ask questions to each other. You can be like, oh, did you, maybe one of you can take the first half of the chapter and the other can take the second half, or something like that, and you guys can swap notes. Really super awesome way to split up your time for that too. Think about test questions, interests and boring stuff. Think about whys. If you get stuck, think about why you get stuck. Was it because it was difficult? Is it because maybe you needed to take a break? Is it because you have a lot going on? Is it because this is a really hard topic for you and you should probably sign up for tutoring? I mean, really think about when you get stuck in reading. And that's that read and explore your confusion. Break long assignments into segments. Read 10 pages, take notes, and then go do something else. Like, don't make yourself do everything all at once. Read prefaces and summaries to learn important details about the book. Look at the table of contents for information about the structure and movement of ideas. Use the index to look up specific names, places, ideas. This all came from a lecture by Dr. Lee Haugen. And you can go here to look at it if you are interested in more information on that. But that is the end of my piece, and I don't know if there are any questions or comments, or if anybody has anything they wanted to bring up, but I am more than happy to answer questions. If you don't want to ask a question here in the webinar today, it doesn't look like anybody has anything, you are more than welcome to email me. I am cmathis1@sienaheights.edu. CMATHIS, the number 1, @sienaheights.edu. I hope this was helpful. I enjoyed presenting. If you have other questions, if you want to make an appointment with me, I'm more than happy to walk you through any of these with your actual text. I love that part of learning. I'm kind of a learning geek, nerd, I don't know what you want to call it. I'm more than happy to help you with that. So make an appointment with me. If you email me and say I need to make an appointment, I'll send my Calendly link back to you. And I hope you have an awesome semester, and I look forward to hearing if this was helpful to anybody. Have a fantastic day, everybody.